कुछ सुनाई नहीं देता।
Am I audible? So, hello.
Yes, continue.
Thank you, ma'am. A warm good afternoon to one and all present here. I, Avnika Singh, on behalf of Lucknow University Moot Court Association, welcome our honorable speakers, Justice Kaushal Jain Thakkar, Professor Dr. Ramesh Gautam, Mr. Margab Kabir, Mr. Harjot Singh, Ms. Iram Majid, Mr. Manish Mehrotra, and Mr. Panchashi Dev Sharma, respected Head and Dean of Faculty of Law, University of Lucknow, Dr. C.P. Singh Sir, respected Chairperson of LUMA, Dr. Vinita Kachar Ma'am, and all the thrilled students and academicians participating in the international workshop on Emergence of International Arbitration Tribunals as New Justice System in India, Future Opportunities and Challenges. International arbitration has emerged as the preferred method of resolving cross-border disputes. The neutrality it offers, together with the relative ease of enforceability of awards, can make it a more attractive forum for dispute resolution rather than litigating in contracting parties' national courts. Its sophistication continues to develop and its popularity grow. But how does it work? Who decides the dispute and according to what laws and process? The central idea of this international workshop is to guide us through these questions. In this two-day workshop, we are fortunate to have among us 5 most esteemed and valuable speakers. For today's session, we have Honorable Justice Dr. Kaushal Jain Thakkar, Professor Dr. Ramesh Gautam, and Advocate Mr. Margab Kabir. I may request the Chairperson of Lucknow University Moot Court Association, Dr. Vinita Kachar Ma'am, to address our reverend speakers and bolster up the spirit of our audience by her words of encouragement. Over to you, ma'am.
A very good afternoon to everyone who have joined us. I, Dr. Vinita Kachar, take this privilege to warmly welcome our speakers and the participants on the first day of the International Workshop on Arbitration. Arbitration is a method of dispute resolution that provides a final and binding outcome, generally regarded as an alternative to court litigation. The main benefits of arbitration are ease of enforcement of awards, the ability to choose who decides the dispute, procedural flexibility, and privacy. I will not speak much on the subject as we have our experts. On behalf of Law Faculty of Lucknow University, I welcome Honorable Dr. Justice Kaushal Jain Thakkar. Justice Thakkar graduated in law from Gujarat University. He was awarded PhD in Environment Law from Gujarat University. He joined the bar in 1987 and practiced in the High Court of Gujarat in labor, service, constitutional, civil, and criminal matters. He was directly appointed as additional judge in 1997. Appointed as additional judge of the High Court of Gujarat in 2030. Justice Thakkar was transferred to Allahabad High Court and took oath as additional judge in 2016 and as permanent judge in 2018. I'm confident, sir, that with your wisdom, the workshop will yield benefit. I wholeheartedly welcome you, Honorable Justice Thakkar. Our next speaker is Professor Ramesh Gautamji, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India for more than 35 years. He has been awarded honoris causa by 5 prestigious universities. He is a visiting professor in many universities in India and abroad. He has been Advocate General for 7 states. He is the first Indian lawyer who has conducted international level dispute review boards, alternate dispute review cases for which he has entered in the Limca Book of Records. He is Padma Shri awardee, Limca record holder, professor of law, author, writer, motivational speaker, political analyst. He's also the senior arbitrator for several organizations. He's the global chairman and director general for the International Human Rights Organization. He also holds the title of international jurist and barrister in the Inns of Court, London. Recipient of 78 national and international awards. Sir, with your wisdom and vast experience, I'm sure that the workshop will yield successful results. Next speaker is Mr. Margoob Kabir. He's a barrister at law of Lincoln's Inn, UK, practicing as an advocate in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. He's widely recognized as an arbitration specialist in Bangladesh and regularly advises and represents private entities and state-owned entities in arbitration, with particular focus on energy, construction, and commercial matters. Mr. Margoob Kabir is also actively involved in legal services of legislations, policies, and guidelines on commercial laws, trade facilitation, fiscal policies, dispute resolutions, etc. Being a legal consultant, Mr. Margoob Kabir of the International Finance Corporation and the UNDP. He researches in the area of company law, foreign investment, and arbitration, and regularly speaks on these fields. Sir, on behalf of Law Faculty, Lucknow University, I wholeheartedly welcome you on this workshop, and I'm sure our participants will be enlightened and the workshop will get successful results. I hand over now to Avnika. I once again wholeheartedly welcome on behalf of Law Faculty, Lucknow University. Over to Avnika.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your kind words. None of this would have been possible without the support and encouragement of our head and dean, Professor C.P. Singh, sir. I may request, sir, to guide us with his words of wisdom. Over to you, sir.
Honorable Justice Kausal Jain Thakur, Professor Dr. Romesh Gautam, Mr. Margoob Kabir, Mr. Harjot Singh, Ms. Eram Majid, Mr. Manish Mehrotra, and Dr. Panchrasidhu Sharma, Professor Binita Kachar, Teacher Coordinator of Luma, members of Luma, देश विदेश से इस वर्कशॉप में पार्टिसिपेंट कर रहे पार्टिसिपेंट्स, टीचर्स, स्टूडेंट्स, जेंटलमैन, लखनऊ विश्वविद्यालय का वित्त संकाय आज 2 दिन का आर्बिट्रेशन पर वर्कशॉप आयोजित कर रहा है। इस वर्कशॉप के प्रमुख स्पीकर ऑनरेबल जस्टिस कौशल जैन ठाकर, प्रोफेसर डॉक्टर रोमेश गौतम, मिस्टर मार्गब कबीर, हरजोत सिंह, एरम माजिद, मिस्टर मनीष मेहरोत्रा, पंचरसिंह शर्मा, मैं सभी का संकाय की तरफ से, विश्वविद्यालय की तरफ से, अपनी तरफ से इस वर्कशॉप में स्वागत करता हूं, अभिनंदन करता हूं, वंदन करता हूं। आप ने सबने इस वर्कशॉप में समय दिया, इसी तरीके से आप सब कृपा संकाय पर बनाए रखें, मेरी कामना है। लखनऊ विश्वविद्यालय का मूट कोर्ट एसोसिएशन हर महीने 2-3 जो है ऐसी एक्टिविटीज करता रहता है। आज जो है आर्बिट्रेशन पर वर्कशॉप आयोजित है। इंडिया में अनादिकाल से अल्टरनेटिव रेमेडीज, डिस्प्यूट रिजोल्यूशंस ये प्रचलित हैं। महाभारत काल में भी जो है कृष्ण जो है दुर्योधन के पास इसी उद्देश्य से गए थे जिसको मीडिएशन भी कह सकते हैं। रामायण काल में रावण के पास अंगद भी गए हुए थे। आपने मुंशी प्रेमचंद की कहानी जुम्मन शेख और अलगू चौधरी वाली कहानी सुनी होगी कि आर्बिट्रेटर पार्टी का चाहे जितना नजदीकी हो, लेकिन आर्बिट्रेशन के समय बिल्कुल निष्पक्ष हो जाता है। तो हमारे देश में ये, और हमने देखा जब मैं छोटा था, जिस स्कूल में पढ़ता था, कुछ कास्ट के लोग उनके यहाँ चौधरी हुआ करते थे, और मैट्रिमोनियल रिमेडी जो है डिस्प्यूट, तो वो एक ही बार में सुलझा दिया करते थे, चाहे डाइवोर्स हो, चाहे सेपरेशन हो, चाहे मेंटेनेंस दिलाना हो। तो ये सब हमारे यहाँ पहले से प्रचलित थे। एक्ट जो है 1940 में आया, फिर 1996 में आया। इधर अमेंडमेंट भी काफी हुए, 2019 में भी लेटेस्ट अमेंडमेंट किए गए हैं। मेरा अपना ये विचार है कि चूंकि ये न्याय दिलाने में सुलभ है, सरल है, कम खर्चीली है, समय कम लगता है, इसलिए इसका विस्तार किया जाना चाहिए। अभी तो जो है आर्बिट्रेशन और कंसिलिएशन ही ये एक्ट दो ही के बारे में जो है प्रावधान करता है, लेकिन मीडिएशन ने भी जो है, निगोशिएशन वगैरह भी जो है, इनको भी मान्यता दी जानी चाहिए एक्ट में, और क्षेत्र भी बढ़ाया जाना चाहिए, जिससे कि चूंकि देश में न्याय बड़ी विलंब से मिल रहा है, कुछ उसमें आसानी होगी। इधर जो है आर्बिट्रेशन का स्कोप प्रैक्टिस के क्षेत्र में भी काफी बड़ा है। लॉ ग्रेजुएट्स काफी न्यू दिल्ली और सब जगह जो है आर्बिट्रेशन का काम कर रहे हैं। काफी स्कोप है आईपीआर और इसमें आर्बिट्रेशन में। तो जो बच्चे हमारे लॉ स्टूडेंट्स हैं, अभी आगे स्पीकर बताएंगे और क्या क्या स्कोप है जानकारी करें और जो है उनका अनुकरण करें। एक बार फिर जो है ऑनरेबल जस्टिस कौशल जैन ठाकर का, रोमेश गौतम जी का, मनीष मेहरोत्रा का तथा अन्य सभी जो है स्पीकर्स का एक बार फैकल्टी की तरफ जो है पुनः स्वागत है, वंदन है, अभिनंदन है। धन्यवाद।
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Listening to you is always a sheer pleasure. It's a matter of great honor and pride that we have among us Honorable Dr. Justice Kaushal Jayendra Thakur. He is currently serving as a judge at Allahabad High Court. A pioneer in the field of law, he has numerous accolades in his name. He is a true inspiration for every student present here. We are fortunate, sir, that you have graced us with your presence, and we will forever be indebted to you. I may request, sir, to grace us with his insightful words on how Indian courts can play a major role in making India a conducive seat for arbitration globally. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. The Honorable the Vice Chancellor in absentia, Professor Alok Kumar Rai, one of the patrons, revered Professor C.P. Singh and Madam Vinita Kachar, and Dr. Gautam and Dr. Mahboob Kabir. How can I forget Avanika? And all those who are on this web portal, and a warm welcome to all of you. When I heard Vinita Madam talking about Dr. Gautam and Mahboob Kabir, I felt that there is a lot of dwarfism in me, just becoming a High Court judge. But with all the eclogues which they have, I really feel that am I the right person to fit in such luminaries? It's the privilege which has been conferred by Professor C.P. Singh on me and his faith in me. See, before I begin, I have always been over-acidic about arbitrations. The reason is, India, under the old Arbitration Act, left behind all its traditions. Say, as Professor Singh said, even as a student, Gujarat marked what was known as one of the biggest systems of arbitrations in the commercial communities. But see what we did with the 1940 Act when it was enacted. Thereafter, lot of litigations. And let me tell you, Professor Sirs, as a judge, I decided recently a matter under the old act between the army and a private litigant. I do not wish to delve into the niceties of that because I wish to show how the Indian judiciary is trying its best to see that we emerge as a globally suited arbitration hub, which we were not till date. The reason for this was the industrialization taking place in 1991, for which we had to bring in the 1996 Act. But the 1996 Act also, it was, as commented by some of them, from the judge's point of view, it's a specialization in arbitration so that it creates incentives for those deciding where to take cases. I do not delve further into this article, but of late, the judiciary is trying its level best to see that mediation does not take march over arbitration. That is not the topic before me. See, all the articles which come up these days, say a senior advocate, Vyapak Desai, recently in one of his columns which appeared in Bar and Bench, comments, ever-changing arbitration landscape in India, yet another attempt, hit or miss. Why? Why all this? Why? When the law is also well settled, that arbitration is for a person who chooses his own person to decide his lists with somebody. But with the globalization since 1991, there were contracts which stipulate arbitrations. Arbitral decisions are now, as I call it, pre-arbitration, post-arbitration. Section 9, you have some dispute, you rush to the court, prolong it. Then comes 34. Now the Supreme Court recently has brought a change in all this. The earlier the Arbitration Act, which is there in vogue in India, namely the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, which is based on the model of the International Commercial Arbitration Councils, AIMS, which was for domestic and international arbitration. It definitely provided what we call as speedy and efficient arbitration. But are the aspirations of the legislation fulfilled? I leave it to the House to decide it in the later articles, later speakers who will speak on the different aspects of arbitral tribunals. The part 1 of the Act, which provides for domestic arbitration, for which now we are not concerned much, it gives powers to the Indian courts for interim measures. The issue is very clear that such entertainments take place for askance. The matter prolongs there. Recently, the Gujarat High Court faced a litigation on the dispute whether, under the provisions of Section 11, whether it would be the district judge before whom the Section 9 application will lie, or it will be before the judge of the senior division. I'm not delving into that. The courts will have to come up heavily on such litigations. The intervention of judiciary has now been, by the new amendment, the wings are cut. The rushing to the courts, except where it can be shown that there was some legal obligation to do the needful. If the valid arbitration agreement is there, the matter has to proceed before the arbitrator. Now, the Supreme Court recently, and even immediately after the commencement of the Act, tried to see that the arbitral awards attain finality and matters are not protracted. The new amendment has tried all this. Now, the grounds for setting aside an arbitral award under Section 34 are well subscribed. But despite that, we day in and day out find that the high courts, the Supreme Courts, the district courts are flooded with this litigation, which makes India a weaker ground for international arbitration. People have moved to Singapore and we have to bring them back. We have what the government now calls public policy. Any arbitral award, the government brings in the challenge on the basis of public policy. The list is pending before some of the high courts, if I would not like to comment on that. The permitted grounds of challenge, even before the tribunals or the courts, are very limited. And therefore, we get what is known as judicial support now. The latest was the judgment of enforcement of foreign arbitrations. 2008 4 SCC, 2010 SCC, where in the case of Bhatia International and in the case of Venture Global Engineering, and latest in the case of Indetel Technical Services, attempt of self-conferred exercise of powers in offshore seat arbitrations made India an unattractive seat for international arbitration, which has now been sought to be salvaged by the later decisions. There have been certain concern with respect to foreign arbitrators. There is confusion also. Institutional arbitration in the country is now getting what I would call the system which envisions the implementation of the 2019 new amendments, which has brought about vast changes. There is an overhauling of the Act. See, at times under this, the matter goes right up to the Supreme Court whether there was an existing arbitration agreement or not. Even under the Arbitration Acts, then we have to fall down on requesting the parties, would you like to go for mediation? That is why I started with the first aspect, that let us see and let us hope that arbitral awards attain finality without protracted litigation and we become the new hub. Say, let us see, we saw one more article while I was going through this subject. Now there is a seat dispute, rather venue debate going on under the Indian Arbitration Act. The role of the courts now is to make it globally viable. We cannot permit people to take away arbitrations from India to foreign countries just because the laws there are more conducive. The courts have made them more effective. Because why? You need arbitrations so as to lessen the burden of the courts, which are plaguing us. You need arbitrations, but at the same time, the arbitral awards cannot be protracted in such a way that you will have to refer them to or drag them away from India. Say, 3 recent judgments show that we are, as the judiciary, now coming to the subject proper in the last 10 minutes, which Avnika has given me, they are that the appointment of arbitral tribunal, arbitration clause, and the umbrella agreement was for appointment of arbitral tribunal. The petition had to be dismissed. The parties had a consensus and a deal. And that is why when ICC had appointed arbitral tribunal, it could not be heard to challenge the orders of the single judge who had refused indulgence. Balfour Alloys Limited versus Madima is a welcome judgment of the Apex Court, reported in 2020, JX, Supreme Court 572. And we have the judgment of Vedanta, a famous judgment, which I need not delve on extensively. The delay is the only bad element which works as counterproductive in arbitral proceedings. The arbitration petitions by municipal corporation was filed under the old act. This is what I am conveying, that our dream of becoming a global arbitration hub will have to be based on the interpretation of the bill of 2018. There were recent judgments, practice of entry of foreign lawyers and law firms and other aspects. The juridical seat issue is plaguing us. And how long it will plague us, we do not know. The enforcement of foreign arbitral awards by the Indian courts is also needed. The judgments of Balco and Sopipes run the field these days. I need not delve much on them, but we are trying, the judiciary is trying to see that arbitration globally is made acceptable and India as a global seat emerges under the leadership of the present government or the governments to come, as we will have to fall back on the ADR systems. The reason being, the courts are over stressed. And as I put it in one of my articles, what happened in 2021? What is our envision? We will have to fall back on ADR mechanisms. And arbitration was the first alternative mechanism which was put into its gears. With the bottlenecks will have to be sorted out and it will have to be re-geared like pre-independence time when it was given precedence over other ADR systems. As Professor Singh said, we had ADR systems much before the advent of the British in India. The close watch on the practice of international arbitration by the courts will see that we become the guardians to promote arbitration throughout the world. I wish all the very best to this workshop, which is for 2 days. I would love to hear Dr. Gautam, who is a renowned scholar in this field. My knowledge is an ABCDian knowledge in the world of arbitrations, as I have always felt, I may be pardoned to say this, that arbitration to succeed in India, we will have to have adherence of time limits fixed now by the new Act. We will have to stop calcitrant attitudes, rushing to the courts, even where arbitrations are to be conducted. Thank you very much, Professor Singh. And I know my lecture would not be having that depth which Professor Gautam or any other professor would be having, nor would I be able to meet their standards, and they will throw much light on the other subjects. The judiciary has up till now, as I would say, has risen to the occasion to see that arbitral tribunals in India get global recognition. Thank you once again. Singh Saab, may I be permitted to leave? I'll join you later on. I have still 5 interviews to continue, if you permit me. May I leave? Am I audible, Avnika ji? May I leave because I have 5 interviews still to.
Sure,
I'll join you at 4 p.m. again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Okay, okay, sir.
Please, please.
Okay, sir.
सुधीर कुमार जी, आपको कुछ प्रश्न है तो पूछ लीजिए. अगर मेरे ज़हन में होगा तो मैं जवाब दे दूंगा.
So I think
Sudeep Kumar ji, you were
Nothing.
putting
just
your
I-
hand, so you want to ask
No.
something?
No, I was just clapping.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I thought you were.
No,
अच्छा,
no,
you were so bored कि आपने तुरंत चालू कर दिया ताली बजाना. Oh,
I did not raise hand.
अच्छा. Was I so boring that you had to start clapping?
No, no, it was very interesting, very knowledgeable.
Thank you, sir. I'll join you at 4:30. Is it
Okay,
proper,
sir.
madam? Sorry. अरे, thank you.
Okay.
भैया ये ले ले.
We have with us Mr. Manish Malhotra also. I had forgotten to welcome him personally. Mr. Manish Malhotra is a senior practicing lawyer at Lucknow. He specializes in arbitration law and commercial business litigation for last 28 years. Sir, I wholeheartedly welcome you on behalf of Law Faculty, Lucknow University. Mr. Malhotra has appeared as senior lead counsel in more than 130 arbitration cases on behalf of several corporate clients in all over India. He has been the keynote speaker on the subject of ADR and quick justice in various training sessions and courses designed for the learned civil and judicial district judges of Uttar Pradesh. He has been a regular speaker on arbitration law since last 2 decades. And sir, we are looking forward for your talk tomorrow. Thank you so much for coming. Yes, Avanika.
thank you, ma'am. It was an enlightening session. We learned that there are so many questions out there that need to be answered and interpreted. I may now I take great pride in introducing you all to our next speaker, Professor Dr. Ramesh Gautam. He is the leading senior advocate of Supreme Court and a recipient of more than 40 national and international awards. He completed his doctoral degree in medical jurisprudence in the year 1989, in addition to the 3 honorary doctoral degrees conferred on him by 3 different universities of India. He has handled many important constitutional matters, including dispute review board cases under ADR, thus entering the prestigious Limca Book of Records. Sir, we are thrilled to have you among us. I request you, sir, to enlighten us and guide us through the nuances of international arbitration. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Respected Honorable Vice Chancellor, Mr. Roy, Mr. C.P. Singh, Madam Vinita, and the distinguished speakers. My topic for today's lecture is Scope of Alternate Dispute Resolution in India. Without waiting much, because I'll may go a little longer, so I'll start with my lecture. To understand ADR, we first need to understand that what it means. It basically means a method of resolving disputes without resorting to litigation. It is often abbreviated as ADR. Public courts may be asked to review the validity of ADR methods, but they will rarely overturn ADR decisions and awards if the disputing parties formed a valid contract to abide by them. Arbitration and mediation are 2 major forms of ADR. Alternate dispute resolution, or ADR, refers to any means of settling disputes outside the courtroom. ADR typically includes early neutral evaluation, negotiation, conciliation, mediation, and arbitration. As increasing court queues, as Justice Thakkar also said that there is stress on the court. So as there is increasing court queues, rising cost of litigation and time delays continue to plague litigants, more states have begun experimenting with ADR programs. Some of these programs are voluntary and others are mandatory. While the 2 most common forms of ADR are arbitration and mediation, negotiation is almost all time exhausted and attempted to resolve the dispute. It is a preeminent mode of dispute resolution. Negotiation allows the parties to meet in order to settle a dispute. The main advantage of this form of dispute settlement is that it allows the parties themselves to control the process and solution. Alternate dispute resolution mechanisms have become more crucial for business operating in India as well as those doing business with Indian firms. Alternate dispute resolution is necessary as a substitute to existing methods of dispute resolution, such as litigation, conflict, violence, and physical fights, or rough handling of the situation. It is a moment with a drive from evolving positive approach and attitude towards resolving a dispute. In the subsequent part of the webinar, we will discuss the evaluation of ADR and its present scenario in the Indian context. It is very important to understand that alternate dispute resolution is not new in India. It has been around in our countries for centuries altogether. In India, the law and practice of private and transactional commercial disputes without court intervention can be dated back to the ancient time. Arbitration or mediation as an alternate to dispute resolution by municipal courts has been prevalent in India from Vedic times. The earliest known treatise is Bhadranayaka Upanishad, in which various types of arbitral bodies, viz. The Puga, the Sreni, and the Kula are referred to. These arbitral bodies, known as panchayats, dealt with the variety of disputes such as disputes of contractual, matrimonial, and even of the criminal nature. The disputants would ordinarily accept the decision of the panchayat, and hence a settlement arrived consequent to conciliation by the panchayat would be as binding as the decision that was clear on legal obligations. The Muslim rule in India saw the incorporation of principles of Muslim law in Indian culture. Those laws were systematically compiled in the form of a commentary and came to be known as Hidayah. During Muslim governed by Islamic law, the Sharia as continued in Hidayah. The Hidayah contains provisions for arbitration as well. The Arabic word for arbitration is takim, while the word for an arbitrator is hakam. The Hidayah contains provisions for arbitration as well. The Arabic word for arbitration is takim. Sorry, it got repeated. An arbitrator was required to possess the qualities essentials for Qazi, an official judge presiding over a court of law whose decision was binding on the parties, subject to legality and validity of the award. The court has the jurisdiction to enforce such awards given under Sharia though it is not entitled to review the merits of the disputes or the reasoning of the arbitrator. ADR picked up pace in the country with the coming of East India Company. The British government gave legislative form to the law of arbitration by promulgating regulations in the three presidency towns, Kolkata, Bombay, and Madras. Bengal Resolution Act 1772 and Bengal Resolution Act 1781 provided parties to submit the dispute to the arbitrator appointed after mutual agreement and whose verdict shall be binding on both the parties. These remained in force till the Civil Procedure Code 1859 and were extended in 1862 to the presidency towns. The Gupta Empire had a separate and distinct judicial system. At the lowest level of the judicial system was the village assembly or the trade guild. These were the councils appointed to settle the disputes between the parties that appear before them. There were separate councils appointed to decide the various matters that came before them. Thus, if people could not reach to any amicable settlement, it was resolved by the councils. During the Mughal dynasty, most villagers resolved their cases in the village courts itself and appealed to the caste court. The arbitration of an impartial umpire, which was known as salis, or by a resort to force. The Maratha Empire established panchayats. They were the first instrument of civil administration of justice under the Marathas to adjudicate cases of simple and minor nature. The disputing parties were to sign an agreement regarding the abiding of the rules and regulation of the panchayat. It was up to the panchayat to study the case and pass a judgment impartially and without any bias to any party. A mamlatdar, the higher officer in the succession of judicial administration, was to confirm the judgment. Generally, the mamlat therein the Panchayat used to adjudicate the cases which were upheld by the Maratha government. With the advent of the British Raj, these traditional institutions of dispute resolution somehow started withering, and the formal legal system introduced by British began to rule. Alternate dispute resolution in the present form picked up a pace in the country with its creation of Bengal regulations. The Bengal regulations were designed to encourage arbitration. After several regulations containing provisions relating to Arbitration Act 8 of 1857 codified the procedure of civil courts except those established by the Royal Charter, which contained sections dealing with the arbitration in suits as well as sections which provided for arbitration without the intervention of the court. Thereafter, the Indian Arbitration Act 1899 was passed, which was based on the English Act by the same name. It was the first substantive law on the subject of arbitration, but its application was limited to the presidency towns of Kolkata, Bombay, and Madras. In 1908, the Code of Civil Procedure was enacted. The code made no substantial changes in the law of arbitration. The Arbitration Act of 1940 was enacted, replacing the Indian Arbitration Act of 1899 and certain parts of the Civil Procedure Code 1908. It amended the consolidated law relating to the arbitration in British India and remained a comprehensive law on arbitration even in the Republican India until 1996. In 1982, settlement of disputes out of court started through Lok Adalats. The first Lok Adalat was held on March 14, 1982 at Junagadh in Gujarat, and now it has been extended throughout the country. Initially, Lok Adalats functioned as a voluntary and conciliatory agency without any statutory backing of its decision. By the enactment of the Legal Services Act 1987, the institution of Lok Adalats received statutory status. To keep pace with the globalization of commerce, the old Arbitration Act of 1940 was replaced by the new Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Settlement of matter concerning the family has been provided under the amendment of the Code of Civil Procedure in 1976. Provisions are made under the Special Marriage Act 1954 and the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 for making efforts for reconciliation. Under Family Courts Act 1984, it is the duty of the family court to make efforts for settlement between the parties. Introduction of Section 89 by way of the 99 Amendment in the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 is a radical advancement made by the Indian legislature in embracing the system of court-referred alternate dispute resolution. Code of Civil Procedure 1859 and its section 312 to 325 dealt with arbitration in suits, while section 326 and 327 provided for arbitration without court intervention. The Code of Civil Procedure repealed the Act of 1882. The Code of Civil Procedure 1908 has laid down that cases must be encouraged to go in for ADR under section 89(1). Under the first schedule of Order 32A, Rule 3, a duty is cast upon the courts that it shall make an endeavor to assist the parties in the first instance in arriving at a settlement in respect of the subject matter of the suit. The second schedule related to the arbitration in suit, while briefly providing arbitration without intervention of the court, Order 1, Rule 1 of the schedule says that where in any suit all the parties agree that any matter in difference between them shall be referred to arbitration, they may at any time before the judgment is pronounced, apply to the court for an order of reference. This schedule is in a way supplemented the provisions of Arbitration Act of 1899. This act was substantially based on the British Arbitration Act of 1889. It expanded the area of arbitration by defining the expression submission to mean a written agreement to submit present and future differences to arbitration, whether an arbitrator is named therein or not. The Geneva Protocol of Arbitration Clauses 1923 and the Geneva Convention of the Execution of Foreign Arbitral Award 1927 were implemented in India by the Arbitration Protocol and Convention Act 1937. This act was enacted with the object of giving effect to the protocol and enabling the convention to become operative in India. Now we'll talk about Arbitration Act of 1940, which dealt with Malika. I'm sorry. Hello.
Yes,
Are you able to hear me?
yes, sir, you are audible.
Hello. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. There was some problem. I think my phone fell down.
It's okay, sir.
Yeah. We'll continue. Arbitration Act 1940 dealt with the domestic arbitration under the 1940 Act. Intervention of the court was required in all the three stages of arbitration in the tribunal. That is, prior to the reference of dispute, in the duration of the proceedings, and after the award was passed. This act made provisions for 1. Arbitration without court intervention. 2. Arbitration in suits, that is arbitration with court intervention in the pending suit. And C. The arbitration with court intervention in cases where no suits were pending before the court. Before an arbitral tribunal took cognizance of a dispute, court intervention was required to set the arbitration proceedings in motion. The existence of an agreement of a dispute was required to be proved. During the course of the proceedings, the intervention of the court was necessary for the extension of time for making an award. Finally, before the award could be enforced, it was required to be made rule of the court. That was under the old Act of 1940, Section 30 and Section 33 of Arbitration Act 1940. This act did not fill the essential functions of ADR. The extent of judicial interference under the act defeated its very purpose. It did not provide a speedy, effective, and transparent mechanism to address disputes arising out of foreign trade and investment transactions. The government then enacted the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 1996 in an effort to modernize the 1940 Act. In India, the model law has been adopted almost in its entirety in the 1996 Act. The changes brought about by 1996 Act were so drastic that the entire case law built up over the previous 56 years of arbitration was rendered superfluous. Absence of a full-fledged arbitration bar effectively prevented arbitrations being heard continuously on day-to-day basis over the normal working hours, that is 4 to 5 hours a day. This resulted in elongation of the period of dispute. It was also said in the ADR Congress held in the year 2010 that the 1996 Act, although modeled along international standards, has so far proved to be insufficient in meeting the needs of the business community for the speedy and impartial resolution of disputes in India. The Law Commission of India prepared a report on the experience of 1996 Act and suggested a number of amendments. Based on the recommendations of the Commission, the Government of India introduced the Arbitration and Conciliation Amendment Bill 2003 in the Parliament. The Standing Committee of Law Ministry felt that the provisions of the bill gave room for excessive intervention by the courts in arbitral proceedings. Modes and practices of ADR in India. ADR can be broadly classified into two categories, that is the court annexed option and mediation, conciliation, and community-based dispute resolution mechanism, that is Lok Adalat. These are the following modes of ADR practiced in India: arbitration, mediation, conciliation, negotiation, Lok Adalat, and dispute review boards. The definition of arbitration under section 2(1)(a) verbatim reproduces the text of Article 2(a) of the Model Law. Arbitration means any arbitration, whether or not administered by a permanent arbitral institution. It is a procedure in which the dispute is submitted to an arbitral tribunal, which makes a decision, an award, on the dispute that is binding on the parties. It is a private, generally informal, and non-judicial trial procedure for adjudicating disputes. There are 4 requirements of the concept of the arbitration: an arbitration agreement, a dispute, a reference to the third party for its determination, and an award by the third party. The essence lies in the point that it is a forum chosen by the parties with the intention that it must act judicially after taking into account the relevant evidence before it and the submission of the parties. Hence, it follows that if the forum chosen is not required to act judicially, the process, it is not arbitration. There are 4 kinds of arbitration: ad hoc arbitration, institutional arbitration, statutory arbitration, and fast track arbitration. Then comes to mediation. Mediation is a process in which the mediator, an external person neutral to the dispute, works with the parties to find a solution which is acceptable to all of them. The basic motive of mediation is to provide the parties with an opportunity to negotiate, converse, and explore options aided by the neutral third party to exhaustively determine if a settlement is possible. Mediation is negotiation carried out with the assistance of the third party. The mediator, in contrast to the arbitrator or judge, has no power to impose an outcome on disputing parties. The Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996 is framed in such a manner that it is concerned mainly with commercial transactions that involves the common man rather than the common man's interest. Coming to conciliation, which is a process in which a new person meets with the parties to dispute, which might be resolved, or relatively unstructured method of dispute resolution in which a third party facilitates communication between the parties in an attempt to help them settle their differences. Section 61 of 1996 Act provides for conciliation of disputes arising out of legal relationship, whether contractual or not, and to all proceedings relating thereto. After its enactment, there can be no objection for not permitting the parties to enter into conciliation agreement regarding the settlement of even future disputes. Then comes to negotiation. Negotiation, communication for the purpose of persuasion, is a preeminent mode of dispute resolution. Compared to the process using mutual third parties, it has the advantage of allowing the parties themselves to control the process and solution. Essentials for negotiations are: it is a communication process, it resolves conflicts, it is a voluntary exercise, it is a non-binding process, parties retain control over outcome and procedure, and there is a possibility of achieving wide-ranging solution and of maximum joint gains. In India, negotiation doesn't have any statutory recognition. Negotiation is a counseling between the parties to resolve their disputes. Now, coming to Lok Adalats. Lok Adalat was a historical necessity in this country, like India, where illiteracy dominated over the aspect of governance. It is introduced in 1982, and the first Lok Adalat was initiated in Gujarat, as I already said. The evolution of the movement was part of the strategy to relieve heavy burden on courts with pending cases. It was the concept of social justice, speedy justice, conciliated results, and negotiating efforts. It is a suitable alternate mechanism to resolve disputes in place of litigation. Lok Adalats have assumed statutory recognition under the Legal Services Act 1987. Now, the last method under ADR is the dispute review boards, which is also called dispute adjudication board. The primary function of the dispute review board is to assist the parties, facilitating and improving communication, encouraging the resolution of contentious issues by the parties at the job level before they become dispute. If the issue cannot be resolved at job level, to assist the contracting parties to resolve the dispute quickly and cost effectively without need for arbitration or litigation. In the first instance, the dispute review boards can formally assist the parties if they so require to resolve any disagreement which arise during the course of the contract work. The members can make recommendations or decisions regarding issues and disputes referred to them by any of the contracting parties. The primary advantage of the standing dispute review board as opposed to the ad hoc appointment of an adjudicator or arbitrator is that whenever a dispute arises, the members of the dispute review boards will have a higher degree of knowledge of and familiarity with the project, its contractual text, its progress, which enables the dispute review board to assist the parties informally by providing recommendations or, if required, to render a decision within a relatively shorter period of time. Dispute adjudication board and dispute review board, there is not much difference, but we will discuss that also. DAB and DRB are widely used ADR mechanism in construction disputes. Standing panel consists of 3 members or 5 members will be constituted for resolving the disputes. The only difference between the DAB and DRB is that the division of the DAB will bind the parties, whereas DRB decision will not bind the parties. The members of the panel must have expertise in the subject matter of dispute. DAB and DRB are used in tunnel projects, railways, highways, buildings, and process contracts involving a variety of employers, including American Telephone and Telegraph, the Hawaiian Department of Transportation, and International Monetary Fund. Some institutions have included DAB and DRB model clause in their standard form of construction contract. For example, FIDIC has included DAB and DRB as prime dispute resolution mechanism and its various model standards from contracts. American Arbitration Association and the International Chamber of Commerce have their own dispute board rules. Part 2 of UK Construction Act has compelled the parties to certain specified construction contract must resolve their dispute through mandatory adjudication. The Chartered Institute of Arbitrators has framed dispute board rules for providing DAB and DRB services to the disputants. Interestingly enough, I am the first lawyer in the country to have done dispute review boards matters in 1994, and for that I entered in Limca Book of Records also. Legal Services Authorities Act 1987 was brought into force on 19th November 1995. The object of the Act was to provide free and competent services to the weaker section of the society to ensure that opportunity for securing justice are not denied to any citizen. The concept of legal services, which includes Lok Adalat, is a revolutionary evolution of resolution of disputes. Though settlements were affected by conducting Lok Nyayalas prior to this act, the same has not been given any statutory recognition. But under the new act, a settlement arrived at the Lok Adalat has been given the force of a decree which can be executed through the court as if it is passed by it. Section 19, 20, 21, and 22 of the Act deals with the Lok Adalat. Section 20 provides for different situations where the cases can be referred to for consideration of Lok Adalat. Delhi High Court has given a landmark decision highlighting the significance of Lok Adalat movement in the case of Abdul Hassan and National Legal Services Authority versus Delhi Vidyut Board and others. The court passed the order giving directions for setting up of the permanent Lok Adalat. The National Consumer Dispute Resolution Commission, in its judgment, Aftab Singh versus MRFGF Land Limited and another, discussed at length the issue whether the Arbitration Act mandates consumer forums constituted under the Consumer Protection Act 1986 to refer parties to the arbitration in terms of a valid arbitration agreement, notwithstanding other provisions of the Arbitration Act and the Consumer Act. In A. Ayyar Swamy versus A. Parameswaram, Justice D.Y. Dhananjay Chandrachud had held that certain category of disputes as a matter of public policy are assigned to the public fora, and those are excluded from the public fora and authoritatively opined the forum will not be barred to entertain complaint under the Consumer Act and has observed as under I will quote. Hence, in addition to various classes of disputes which are generally considered by the courts as appropriate for decision by public fora, there are classes of disputes which fall within the exclusive domain of special fora under legislation which confers exclusive jurisdiction to the exclusion of an ordinary civil court, that such disputes are not arbitrable with the general principle that a dispute which is capable of adjudication by an ordinary civil court is also capable of being resolved by arbitration. However, if the jurisdiction of an ordinary civil court is excluded by the conferment of the exclusive jurisdiction of a specified court or tribunal as a matter of public policy, such a dispute would not then be capable of resolution by arbitration, unquote. Section 3 of the Consumer Protection Act states that the provisions of this act shall be in addition to and not in derogation of the provisions of any other law for the time being in force. The act protects the rights of the consumers, and the remedy provided under the act is in addition to the provisions of any other law. In many other leading cases, it has been the object to understand the preamble of the act, and the act is social legislation to protect the rights of the consumer. It becomes necessary for the court to interpret the act in same sense. The arbitrary nature of the consumer dispute will nullify the main object of the act, as consumer will have to fight for its rights in arbitration, which is pro-corporate, and it ends the meaning of the formation of the Consumer Redressal Commission. From the preamble of the Consumer Protection Act, it is apparent that the main objective of the act is to protect the rights and interests of the consumers by providing mechanism through which cheaper, expeditious, easy, and effective redressal is made available to the consumers. Supreme Court held and observed that, I am just quoting, the preamble of the act declares that it is an act to provide for better protection of the interest of the consumers, and for that purpose to make provisions for the establishment of consumer councils and other authorities for the settlement of the consumer dispute and matters connected therewith. As per the amendment, Section 8(1) of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, the forum should be judicial authority before which the parties applies for arbitration should refer the parties to arbitration unless it finds that prima facie no valid arbitration agreement exists. The language of the amended section clearly states that the dispute should be referred to the arbitration if a party applies to a judicial authority unless the judicial authority finds that no valid agreement exists. The Supreme Court, in the case of Fair Air Engineers Private Limited and another versus NK Modi, while holding that the consumer firms were judicial authority, inter alia observed that it is seen that Section 3 envisages that the provisions of the Act are in addition to and are not in derogation to any other law for the time being in force. It is true, as rightly contended by Shri Suri, that the words in derogation of the provisions of any other law for the time being in force would be given proper meaning and effect if the complaint is not stayed and the parties are not relegated to the arbitration. The Act purports to operate in derogation of the provisions of the Arbitration Act. Prima facie, the contention appears to be plausible, but on construction and conspectus of the provisions of the Act, we think that the contention is not well founded. Parliament is aware that the provisions of the Arbitration Act and the Contract Act 1872 and the consequential remedies available under Section 9 of the Code of Civil Procedure, that is, to avail right of civil action in a complaint in a competent court of civil jurisdiction. Nonetheless, the Act provides the additional remedy. Any dispute between the private parties can be adjudicated by arbitration as per the choice of the parties, as long as the disputes are not barred by legislation. The Supreme Court of India, in the case of Booz Allen versus Hamilton Inc. versus SBI Home Finance Limited, explained the conceptual framework of what kind of disputes are arbitrable and non-arbitrable. Adjudication of certain categories of proceedings are reserved by the legislature exclusively for public fora as a matter of public policy. Certain other categories of the cases, though not expressly reserved for adjudication by the public fora, courts and tribunal, may by necessary implication stand excluded from the purview of the private fora. Consequently, where the cause or dispute is inarbitrable, the court where the suit is pending will refuse to refer the parties to arbitration under Section 8 of the Act, even if the parties might have agreed upon the arbitration as the forum for settlement of the disputes. The courts are required to draw a line between what is arbitrable and what is not arbitrable by ensuring that sensitive matters of public interest falls within the principle of jurisdiction of the courts, and the dispute between the private parties can be freely chosen to do arbitration rather than litigating their differences. Supreme Court, in its various decisions, has interpreted Section 3 of the Consumer Protection Act and has held that the Act is enacted with the object to provide a better interest of consumers. And for this purpose, the consumer councils have been established so that the interest of the consumers can be protected by providing for better redressal. Mechanism, though, which cheaper, easier, expeditious, and effective redressal is made available to the consumers. The court in Aftab Singh Supra further held that Consumer Acts was envisaged as a special social legislation to protect consumer rights. Unlike other legislation that create dispute resolution mechanism between the level players, this legislation established a level playing field between unequal players, that is consumers and the large corporation. The larger bench of NCDRC deciding the issue has held that if the arbitration is allowed, it would prove to be against the entire purpose and object of the Act. To protect the interest of the consumers by ensuring speedy, just and expeditious resolution and disposal of the consumer disputes, exposure of consumer disputes to the arbitration will invite application of Arbitration Act, which is enforceable through civil court, which would be against the purpose of the Consumer Act. The court further concluded that the statutory enactment which are established with a specific purpose to adjudicate and govern the specific disputes are not arbitrable, as there were vast domains of legal universe that are not arbitrable and kept at a distance from the private dispute resolution. Presently, the case has been taken up by the Honorable Supreme Court to examine the correctness of the decision of the larger bench of NCDRC in Aftab Singh versus MGF Land Limited and another, which has held that the consumer disputes cannot be settled by arbitration. The Honorable Supreme Court should find a balance towards the applicability of both the acts so that the legislature, philosophy, and social objective of the Consumer Protection Act 1986 and Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996 could be achieved while protecting the interest of the rights of the parties. In the end, I would like to conclude by saying that with the advent of alternate dispute resolution, there is no new avenues for the people to settle their disputes. The settlement of the dispute in Lok Adalat quickly has acquired good popularity among the people, and this has been really given rise to the new force of ADR, and this will no doubt reduce the pendency of law courts. This is an urgent need for justice dispensation through ADR mechanism. The ADR movement needs to be carried forward with greater speed. This will considerably reduce the load of the courts apart from providing instant justice at the doorstep without substantial cost being involved. If they are successful in giving effect, then it will really achieve the goal of rendering social justice to the parties to the disputes. Thank you. Yes, Avnika, over to you.
Avnika, turn on your mic.
So actually, I was muted. Thank you so much, sir. As sir said, that transparency of arbitration allows the party to control the process and the solution. It was enlightening to know that in ancient India, Mughals, Marathas, and other dynasties practiced arbitration for resolution of their disputes.
Right.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful session. We cannot be more thankful to you. Sir, if you permit, we would like to take certain questions.
Yes, sure. One by one.
Yes, sir. I would like to tell all the participants that we have a time limit of 5 minutes. Within those 5 minutes, there will be question and answers. I request the convener of LUMA, Ms. Swati Singh, to please present the questions to Mr. Sir.
A very good afternoon, sir. The first question we have is from Mr. Shashank. His question is, for a first-year law student, what should be an ideal approach in his or her upcoming years in order to secure an excelling career in the field of ADR?
To the best of my knowledge, in first and second year of law, I think Professor C.P. Singh would be able to say more, but to the best of my knowledge, the law subjects are not taught in first 2 years of law. So the law subjects comes only in third, fourth, and fifth year in 5 years law. But in 3 years law, yes, it is there. So one can concentrate more on arbitration and more on arbitration book, and also can do internship with the lawyer who has more arbitration cases in order to have the grip of the subject. That is what I can say.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question we have from Mr. Aman Pandey. The question says, In case of international commercial arbitration, if the choice of law opted by the parties to dispute is not in consonance with the law of the land, whether the arbitral tribunal is bound to stick with it or it can be amended during the proceedings. Over
See,
to you.
it is a settled proposition of law in ABC consultant's case that the parties cannot have jurisdiction of their choice. You cannot deny the territorial jurisdiction of the courts. If the territorial jurisdiction of the court is in India and the dispute is outside India, the territorial jurisdiction will come into play. It will all depend on the territorial jurisdiction of the court, because we cannot remove the territorial jurisdiction of the courts. But if there is dispute between the two countries and both the courts have jurisdiction, then yes, the parties can decide they want to opt for which jurisdiction. In that case, yes. Next.
Okay, thank you, sir. That's it for this this session.
Any
Over
other
to you,
question?
Abhinav.
There's no question?
No, sir.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much,
Thank
sir.
you so much, sir, for answering the questions of our participants.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It is a pleasure to be with you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Moving on. It is our utmost privilege that we have with us Mr. Margab Kabir. He is a barrister at law of Lincoln's Inn, United Kingdom, and practicing as an advocate in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. He is widely recognized as an arbitration specialist in Bangladesh and regularly advises and represents private entities and state-owned entities. I request you, sir, to guide us and throw light upon the various aspects of international arbitration. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. I hope I'm audible enough for everyone.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon to my respected speakers, the faculties, staffs, and students of University of Lucknow. It is a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to speak on this auspicious occasion. I give my heartiest congratulations for the 100 years of the university. It is remarkable. Today, I'm going to speak on a very important topic of jurisdictional objections in international arbitration. The reason it's extremely important is because it relates to the actual power of the tribunal to decide on a dispute. The jurisdiction, as you know, the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal is decided by the parties at the first stage, that is at the initial stage. Now, how is it done? It is done by deciding and agreeing upon the specific arbitration clause. It's basically when we talk about jurisdiction, what we think most of the time is, the case law or subsequent effect of the jurisdiction. But one thing that needs to be understood is that who decides at the first stage the jurisdiction of the tribunal? It is basically the parties when they enter into the agreement. The parties can decide, they can decide what will happen to the arbitration clause. How will it impact? What ambit will it cover? Now, parties can decide that all disputes, typical clauses like all disputes arising out of or in relation to a particular agreement shall be referred to arbitration. In such cases, the jurisdiction of the tribunals are very wide and typically covers almost all disputes in relation to that arbitration. But there are other cases. There are other cases in which the parties have decided that, for example, in a construction contract, in case of additional or variance of work, an engineer or a third-party institution shall decide whether there was actually any addition or variation of work. And it is only thereafter the arbitral tribunal will decide on the damages or the effect of such additional or variation of work. So it's basically a two-tier dispute resolution clause. Now, I will come back to that as to what happens there and in those cases. Now, what kind of jurisdictional challenges are generally raised in an arbitration? We all know that, the jurisdictional challenges are raised in the first stage. The jurisdictional challenges needs to be very specific because you're basically challenging the tribunal that it does not have jurisdiction to hear the dispute before them. Now, the reason I want to speak about what kind of challenges is basically because there are two challenges, two categories mostly in my view. One, it's a partial challenge to jurisdiction, and the second one is a total challenge to jurisdiction. Now, what is the partial challenge? A partial challenge raises the question of whether certain of the claims or counterclaims that have been submitted are within its jurisdiction or not. So in effect, it means that it is not saying the tribunal, you do not have jurisdiction, but it is saying that the tribunal, you do not have jurisdiction for this matter. You may have jurisdiction for something else. You remember the clause that I just now referred about the engineer and the third party. It is in relation to something like that. In such a case, for example, if a party, without going to the engineer or third party, straight away files for arbitration before the tribunal, then the tribunal can be challenged. One of the party can challenge the jurisdiction of the tribunal by stating that it's a partial challenge. We are challenging the fact that there was a precondition of coming to the tribunal. There was a precondition which needed to be fulfilled. What was that precondition? That precondition was submitting about the additional or variance of work before the engineer or the third party institution. As that has not been done, the tribunal does not have jurisdiction till that specific provision has been complied with. Bear in mind, I'm telling you this from actual scenarios which has actually been done. So at that stage, if the tribunal still goes on with the proceedings, one of the parties can challenge the jurisdiction of the tribunal, saying that it went beyond the ambit of the agreed clause of the parties. Now, let us turn to the total challenge of jurisdiction. Now, the total challenge of jurisdiction basically challenges the whole basis upon which the arbitral tribunal is acting or purporting to act. This is actually most common. This is more common than the partial challenge. Now, what are the scenarios that a total challenge of jurisdiction arises? One, a party can claim that it is not a party to the agreement which has the arbitration clause. So, for example, one of the party can say that I did not sign this agreement, or I was not a party to this agreement out of which the arbitration arose. So in that case, they can challenge the jurisdiction of the tribunal. Secondly, it can also say that a party can claim that I have not consented to this document. When is those done? Because I'm sure you're aware that sometimes arbitration is, you opt into an arbitration by reference to a specific document. Now the parties can say that I have not consented to that reference, and as such, I cannot be compelled to go into arbitration. Another scenario that may be said is that a party can claim that the legal entity signing the agreement was a different and distinct legal person. Now, when does this come in? It comes in when a third party is inducted in the arbitration. That third party normally comes in and says that, hey, it is not me who is to be brought into this arbitration. It is company A or company B, or party A or party B, but not me. I was not a party to that arbitration agreement. In that case, the third party can challenge the jurisdiction of the tribunal, particularly in relation to his issues or her issues. And lastly, this is also an example from a practical case, is that a party may claim that the agreement out of which the arbitration arose has been novated by a subsequent agreement. So the arbitration which arose from an earlier contract cannot continue because the parties have opted for novation, the terms and conditions has been changed, and now you cannot go into the earlier clause for arbitration. Why is this is very interesting? Why is this interesting? As you know that we're all aware about the doctrine of separability. Now, what is this doctrine of separability? The doctrine of separability is that an arbitration clause in an agreement is considered to be an independent contract. Why does it mean to be an independent contract? It is meant to be an independent contract because what happens if the original contract is terminated? Does that mean that there cannot be any arbitration because the clause was inside that original contract? No, that's where the doctrine of separability comes in. The doctrine of separability says that even if the contract is terminated, the arbitration clause is a separate contract and that will prevail. Now, in that case that I've referred to, that a party entered into an agreement and there was a dispute. Subsequently, the parties entered into a settlement agreement. What happened in the settlement agreement? They said that all previous claims are gone. Now we are coming into a resolution that this will be our, this was the payment to be made, or this is what has to be done. And there was a dispute resolution and arbitration clause in the settlement agreement. Now, what one of the party has done, that once the settlement agreement failed and it was not complied, one of the party initiated arbitration in the previous main contract. Now, when they started arbitration in the main contract, the other party raised objection to the jurisdiction of the tribunal. By what? By stating that that contract has been novated by a subsequent contract, and you cannot initiate an arbitration out of a contract which has been novated. Now, the tribunal went ahead and asked that the question of doctrine of severability. They said the doctrine of severability comes in and the first contract arbitration clause should prevail and they should have jurisdiction. Now, ultimately what had happened is that there was a finding of the tribunal saying that the subsequent contract basically made the entire contract null and void, and as it had a separate dispute resolution clause, the previous contract was buried under the carpet, and any dispute can only arise out of the subsequent contract. In that way, they have declined their jurisdiction. Now, moving on, I would like to ask, so what are the options that are left to a respondent in a case where it intends to challenge the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal? So, one, it may challenge the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal before the tribunal itself. Number two, it may challenge the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal before the national court. We all know about the fact that, the anti-arbitration, anti-suit arbitration cases and all, where you get an injunction from the court saying that, there should not be any arbitration, it should be settled by the court. And number three is, it may completely boycott the arbitration proceedings and just to wait until the award is rendered and then challenge the award. How is it challenged? They cannot set aside the award. They can challenge enforcement of the award. I will come to that point soon. So now I go to the next one. Now, who decides the jurisdiction of the original tribunal? Who will decide the jurisdiction? As you all, I'm sure, are aware that it is generally accepted that an arbitral tribunal has power to decide on its own jurisdiction. This is the principle of competence, which means that the tribunal itself is competent to decide on its own jurisdiction. If a challenge is made to the tribunal's jurisdiction, it has to be placed before the tribunal itself, and then the tribunal will decide whether it has it or not. Now, this is basically entrusted in most of the national laws. So, for example, the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, and also all institutional rules as well, in the UNCITRAL arbitration rules, in the ICC rules of arbitration, even in the UNCITRAL model law. Now, I'll give you an example as to what is said in the UNCITRAL arbitration rules. Article 23 of the rules specifically says, the arbitral tribunal shall have the power to rule on its own jurisdiction, including any objections with respect to the existence or validity of the arbitration agreement. So that is, it clearly recognizes the authority of the tribunal. Then let us go to the ICC rules of arbitration. ICC rule Article 6, sub-rule 9 specifically states, unless otherwise agreed, the arbitral tribunal shall not cease to have jurisdiction by reason of any claim that the contract is non-existent or null and void. The arbitral tribunal shall continue to have jurisdiction to determine the parties' respective rights and to decide the claims and pleas, even though the contract itself may be non-existent or null and void. In this way, what the ICC rules does is basically it includes the doctrine of separability as well as the power of the tribunal to decide on its own jurisdiction in this specific article. But there is a distinction in ICC rules. There is an additional element. You are aware that under the ICC rules they have the ICC Court of Arbitration, which is a separate forum. What happens in case of jurisdictional challenge under the ICC arbitration rules is that it is highlighted to that effect that the Secretary General of the ICC, if a party in an ICC arbitration challenges jurisdiction of a tribunal, the Secretary General of the ICC Court of Arbitration can refer that specific jurisdictional objection to the ICC Court of Arbitration. What the Court of Arbitration can do at that stage, they decide upon reviewing the contract and the objection whether it can proceed or not, or they can leave it to the tribunal to decide on its own jurisdiction. In most cases, ICC Court of Arbitration actually leaves it to the tribunal. They uphold the principle of competence. But you should keep in mind that the court also has the power to decide on jurisdiction. Finally, I would also want to highlight the ancestral model law. Article 16 of the ancestral model law also allows and specifically states that the arbitral tribunal may rule on its own jurisdiction, including any objections with respect to the existence or validity of the arbitration agreement. In those wordings, it also allows the tribunal to decide on its own jurisdiction. As I'm sure all of you know, that Section 16 of the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act allows determination of jurisdiction by the tribunal itself as well. The question now arises as to in what stage does the tribunal decide on challenge to the jurisdiction. In most national law and institutional rules, it is provided that the party challenging the jurisdiction must do so in the first available opportunity and in any event not after filing the statement of defense. It has to be raised prior to or at the time of filing the statement of defense. The reason being is because the tribunal needs to be made aware of that their lack of jurisdiction at the beginning, at the preliminary stage. Now, once the jurisdiction is challenged, it is now up to the tribunal to decide whether they will determine the challenge as a preliminary issue or whether they will decide on the challenge along with the merits of the arbitration in the final award. So just because a challenge is made, it does not automatically means that it will be decided straight away. The tribunal can actually decide that now we will decide it at the merit stage. We'll render an award which will have a preliminary maintainability issue, and then if we have jurisdiction, we'll also give a full award on the merits. The discretion is generally left to the tribunal, but in some cases, national law provide options to the court also to decide the jurisdiction of the tribunal, but on limited options. This is usually done only in relation when the court is of the idea that it will save substantial cost and time of the parties. But bear in mind, this is very uncommon. It is not available in most cases, but it is, for example, available in the laws of Bangladesh, but I do not think it's available in the laws of India. Under the ICC arbitration rules, what happens under the ICC arbitration rules? The ICC arbitration rules is, as you may know, that it's ad hoc arbitration rules. And these rules are opted in by parties in both in international, and you can also do it for locally, but mostly in international ad hoc arbitration, ancestral arbitration rules are adopted. Now, ancestral arbitration rules over the years since 1976 has provided certain jurisprudence on challenge of jurisdiction of arbitral tribunal. It's the parties generally in an ancestral arbitration rule files a request for bifurcation of proceedings. Now, what is this request for bifurcation? This is what I was saying, that this is a formal method of filing an application before the tribunal, stating in clear grounds that why the party thinks that the preliminary issue of jurisdiction should be separated from the merit stage. That's why they request a bifurcation of the proceedings of the entire proceedings. In exercising their discretion to bifurcate the proceedings into a separate jurisdictional phase, tribunals have been guided, generally has been guided by the principle of fairness and efficiency, such as what I said, cost and time. In determining whether preliminary objections should be heard separately from merits by bifurcating the proceedings, the tribunal generally has considered some of the following factors. One, whether the objection is substantial, that is, whether it is just a frivolous or a mere application to delay the proceeding, or whether it is substantial. Number two, whether, if granted, the objection to jurisdiction would result in a material reduction of the proceedings at the next phase. This is why is it important? Is because if the tribunal says that it does not have jurisdiction, it need not go into the merit of the matter. It can stop and pull out and say that you decide the dispute as per the method which is included in the agreement. So it has a material impact on the next phase of the arbitration proceedings. And thirdly, whether the bifurcation is impractical. You understand that in a lot of cases, the decision of jurisdiction might be so intertwined with the merit that it is not possible to give a render a decision on jurisdiction. In those cases, what happens? The tribunal declines to give an award on jurisdiction and says, let's proceed, and we will give a decision on jurisdiction at the final stage, when along with the award on the merits, if any. Arbitral tribunals have also noted that dealing with jurisdictional objections preliminarily so as to avoid imposing full-fledged proceedings on a party disputing that it is a subject to arbitration is good practice, particularly when bifurcation results in increased efficiency in terms of both time and cost. It is well established that dealing with a challenge to a tribunal's jurisdiction in a preliminary phase enables the parties to know where they stand at an early stage, and it will save time. It will save them spending time and money on arbitral proceeding that proves to be invalid. I will come to that a little bit more on the enforcement stage. Now, arbitral tribunals have also noted that dealing with jurisdictional objections preliminarily so as to avoid full expense is good practice, like I said. And in most of the time, in noting that they have bifurcated under the ancestral arbitration rules, they have bifurcated the proceedings. And in bifurcating the proceedings, they decided on the jurisdictional stage at a preliminary phase. And then if they accepted jurisdiction, they proceeded with the merits. And if they did not accept the jurisdiction, they declined and the arbitration at that stage was stopped. Now, what happens if a tribunal rejects challenge to jurisdiction and eventually renders an award? Now, this is important because, like I was telling you, that if a party challenges the jurisdiction at the first stage, now, when a party challenges the jurisdiction at the first stage, and the option that is available to the party was what? Challenge the jurisdiction of the tribunal, go to the national court challenging the jurisdiction of the tribunal, or boycott the arbitration proceedings. And the last one was challenging the award. Now, if you are aware that if a party is not participating, or if not, they're not participating in a particular arbitration phase, it will be very difficult to succeed in the set-aside application. Particularly, for example, if it's an international arbitration. For example, the arbitration is being carried out in Singapore. And you know that in case of the seat of arbitration, wherever the seat of arbitration is, the setting aside application has to be filed in the courts of that jurisdiction. So if I'm an Indian party and my arbitration, I'm not participating in an arbitration which is being held in Singapore, if I were to challenge the application by way of a set-aside application, I have to do so in the courts of Singapore. Now, is that the only option left? No. I can, of course, go in the courts of Singapore and challenge and file a set-aside application with a particular ground that, that I did not agree to this arbitration clause, and hence the tribunal did not have jurisdiction. It's a very strong ground. I can do that. But I also have another option. What is the other option? The other option is if that individual party which wins the arbitration, despite not having jurisdiction, despite the tribunal not having jurisdiction, comes to India to enforce the award, I can also challenge the enforcement at that stage. Because as you may know, the New York Convention has specific grounds for challenging a set-aside application and also for refusing recognition of foreign arbitral awards. Now, when the parties can file for setting aside on the ground that the arbitration was not agreed, they can do so by filing an set-aside application. Alternatively, the parties can challenge the enforcement of the award on the same ground that the tribunal did not have jurisdiction. The nullifying of an award in the absence of a valid arbitration agreement is recognized both in national laws and in international conventions governing arbitration. Like I said, it's recognized under the ancestral arbitration rules. It's recognized under the New York Convention. It is also recognized under the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act. In the ancestral model law, for example, one of the limited cases in which it is possible to challenge an award is that in which the arbitration agreement is not valid under the law. So it goes directly to the jurisdiction of the tribunal. internationally, like I was mentioning many times, the New York Convention provides that recognition and enforcement of an award may be refused on proof that the award deals with the differences not contemplated by or not following within the terms of submission to agreement, to arbitration, or it contains decisions on matters beyond the scope of submission to arbitration. This is specifically the grounds on which the jurisdiction of an arbitral tribunal is generally challenged. So if a party challenges the jurisdiction of an arbitral tribunal and still the tribunal goes ahead and renders an award, that party can, even at the last stage of enforcement of that award, can challenge the enforcement on that specific ground that the tribunal did not have jurisdiction. Any challenge to jurisdiction during the course of an arbitral proceedings is usually made to the tribunal itself. The arbitral tribunal usually decides whether, like I was saying, to bifurcate, to allow jurisdiction, or whether to allow it to go to the merit stage. But generally, as you know, that it is the duty and responsibility of the arbitral tribunal to render an enforceable award. It has to be an award which is enforceable. They cannot just render an award for the sake of rendering an award. And even if they do so, it goes directly to the reputation of those particular arbitrators, as well as the institution under which the arbitration was conducted. So, these are the issues which comes up. And for that particular reason, whenever there is a challenge on jurisdiction, the arbitrators takes it very seriously, because it goes directly to their authority. In many cases, the tribunal, intends or suggests that they will decide it on the merit stage. But in my opinion, and not only in my opinion, in opinions of many luminaries in this field, is that you should not push this decision at the last stage. The decision on jurisdiction of the tribunal should and must be determined at the preliminary stage. Because if a party is compelled to continue with an entire arbitration proceeding only to receive an award in the end saying that we did not have jurisdiction, it becomes the entire time and costs which is incurred by that party goes into vain. And then the party initiating the arbitration and the party which are defending the arbitration, all of them incur substantial costs. And the entire proceedings of arbitration gets questionable, that why are they being compelled to do so. If I want to say that, but why is jurisdiction so important? In ICSID arbitrations, for example, these are investor state arbitration, which are generally between investors and a state, or a state between an investor. Particularly in those arbitrations, you would see in most cases, the investor or the state challenges jurisdiction in the preliminary stage. And once it's challenged in the preliminary stage, you would see in the jurisprudence of ICSID that substantial amount of time and substantial amount of jurisprudence research work is put in right at the jurisdiction stage. The reason is that jurisdiction is so important, and that jurisdiction is extremely important, not only to decide on the merit of the issue, but also for the award to be enforceable, for the award to be not subject to annulment. Because in ICSID, it's not called set aside, it's called annulment, not subject to annulment. Now, it cannot be highlighted more, the importance of jurisdiction. And every section or every national law or every international institutional rules have particular sections specific on jurisdiction. And in most sections, whether directly or indirectly, it is referred there that these issues are required to be decided as a preliminary matter. And I would say that, in the UNCITRAL arbitration rules, once, the arbitration rules was amended and the new version in 2010, it took out the it took out the wording that it must be determined as a preliminary stage, but it still left it to the tribunal to decide. And I'm telling you that in most cases, the tribunal decides jurisdiction on a preliminary stage. Now, in conclusion, what I would like to tell you is that jurisdictional objections are critical for the parties in an arbitration. It is an objection which needs to be raised at the first available opportunity. It goes to the root of the authority of the tribunal to decide the dispute in an arbitration. National laws and the international conventions, as I've mentioned, the New York Convention on arbitration, emphasize how important it is that an arbitral tribunal should not exceed its jurisdiction. As if it does, it usually leads to a nullity of an award, which was rendered by an expensive arbitration proceeding. So it is always advisable that if a party has an objection to jurisdiction, it is not only raised at the first available opportunity, but raised in a manner with extreme specificity and seriousness as the issue entails. The tribunal also are entrusted with the responsibility to decide on its jurisdiction. So it must be very careful and meticulous in upholding the responsibility accorded to it to rule on its jurisdiction. Bear in mind, it is extremely important for the tribunal, the parties, the lawyers, and all involved to note that it is to be kept in mind that dispute resolution by arbitration is consensual and should never be imposed upon any party. And if it is done so, the tribunal should respectfully decline jurisdiction. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed this, this lecture. And this is a topic which you would see there's a lot of jurisprudence in it, and a lot of jurisprudence not only under the national laws of specific countries, because in Bangladesh we practice, we refer to the ancestral arbitration law. Our law is based on ancestral model law, but we generally take, we use precedents of all over the world. We use the English precedents, we use precedents from the Supreme Court of India, and more often than not, what we see that there is a paradigm shift from the courts. They're all upholding, as the Honorable Justice had mentioned, they're upholding the arbitration clauses. The arbitration, they're saying that, whenever there's an arbitration clause, the court should not interfere. But it should be borne in mind that that entrustment, that responsibility cannot be given unhindered. The challenge on jurisdiction is one of the phases that responsibility should be taken very seriously by the tribunal itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for throwing light on the importance of jurisdictional objections in international arbitration, determination of jurisdiction, and how this jurisdiction can be challenged. So, if you permit, may we take certain questions from our participants?
Certainly, yes.
Thank you, sir. Over to you, ma'am.
A very good afternoon, sir. The first question that we have is from Ms. Shraddha. The question is, power of tribunal to decide its own jurisdiction, isn't it violative of principle of natural justice?
It is not actually violation of principle of natural justice. The reason being is that when the parties opts for arbitration, it is automatically parties by itself are providing that option to the tribunal. For example, if the parties do not want the tribunal to decide on its own jurisdiction, they can do so. They can basically redraft the arbitration clause and specifically say, for example, they can write something like, any dispute arising out of this agreement shall be settled by way of arbitration. However, in case of challenge on the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal, the tribunal shall not have the authority to decide on its own jurisdiction. In doing so, the parties themselves automatically takes out that power from the tribunal. So it's entirely up to the parties how they want to word their arbitration clause.
Thank you, sir. The other question is from Ms. Dyuti Dikshit. I guess I'm pronouncing her name right. The question is, what happens if one of the party ignores arbitration award and commences other court proceedings? Over to you, sir.
So in this case, that if one of the parties ignores an arbitration clause and commences court proceedings, that that's where the provision comes in, that there's a specific provision, I'm sure there's a specific provision in the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act as well, that before filing, for example, if I am the party who wants to go into arbitration and another party ignores that arbitration and files a suit in the national courts, there's a provision in the law which says that before filing the written statement in that particular case, I have to raise an objection that the court does not have in that case, the court does not have jurisdiction to decide on this. It is only the arbitral tribunal. At that stage, what happens? The court declines its jurisdiction. It does not set aside that proceeding. It stays the proceeding and refers the matter to the arbitral tribunal. But in doing so, the court basically at that stage decides on the arbitration agreement, that whether it's a valid arbitration agreement or not. If the court decides that yes, it's a valid arbitration agreement, it usually stays the proceedings and refers the matter to the tribunal. Now, what happens if the court does not decline its jurisdiction? If the court does not decline its jurisdiction and it's continuing with its proceedings, bear in mind, even if it continues, there has been many cases throughout the world in where the court basically has given an injunction or a stay of the arbitration proceeding, of an international arbitration proceeding, but the international arbitration proceeding did not stay. So the tribunal did not stay or injunct itself from the proceeding, and it went ahead and rendered an award. Now, what happens once it went ahead and rendered an award? That award could not be set aside. The reason could not be set aside because usually, these arbitrations are held internationally in a separate country. And in that country, the seat of arbitration normally says that no, this tribunal had jurisdiction, they will render an award. But where does the problem comes? The problem comes in case of enforcement. Because when that award is brought in, for example, in India to enforce, and the Indian courts has given an injunction in the arbitration proceedings, that enforcement court in India will say that you were injuncted from these proceedings. Why did you proceed? So, and then it may decline the arbitration award. But usually, as Mr. Justice has already mentioned, that usually the courts are reluctant to basically stay any proceedings in which there is an arbitration clause.
Thank you so much, sir. That's it. Over to you, Abnika. You can carry on.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was a very enriching experience. With that, we come at the end of today's session. On behalf of Lucknow University Moot Court Association, I would like to extend my gratitude to our honorable speakers for taking out time from their busy schedules. And I'm incredibly thankful to all the participants for their active participation on day one of the event. And we hope to see you all tomorrow as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Margab Kabir ji. Many thanks to you giving time in this workshop.